Good Monday morning. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. We begin with breaking news this morning. Delegations from Ukraine and Russia meeting on the Belarus border to discuss how to end the war. That meeting comes after 4 days of heavy fighting across Ukraine. Overnight, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky reporting several Ukrainian casualties so far, including 16 children. President Zelensky also says 4,500 Russian soldiers have been killed. U.S. intelligence shows that despite Russia's advances, Ukraine still has control of its cities, including the capital, Kyiv, and its second biggest city, Kharkiv. Now, as the fighting continues, many Ukrainians are faced with a choice: stay and fight or flee with their families.
Me and my husband with my two daughters, we escape because I'm very dangerous for my family.
In Russia, President Vladimir Putin ordered his nuclear forces on high alert in response to what he called aggressive statements by NATO. It's a move one expert describes as unprecedented in the post-Cold War era. Now, the European Union is planning to fund the delivery of weapons to Ukraine, plus block Russian aircraft from flying in EU territory. And today, the UN General Assembly is set to meet for a rare emergency meeting on the war in Ukraine. We have team coverage this morning with military analyst Colonel Jack Jacobs, foreign correspondent Matt Bodner, who's just north of the Ukrainian border in Russia, and NBC News contributor Jack Crosby in Kharkiv. We're going to start our coverage this morning with NBC News correspondent Cal Perry in western Ukraine. Cal, we know Russian and Ukrainian negotiators are holding talks on Ukraine's border with Belarus. Have we heard anything from that meeting so far? Are there any hopes for a ceasefire?
You know, I'm not sure that hopes are running high, but they are talking, and it is a fairly high-level delegation here from the Ukraine. The defense minister is there. We're not clear on who's there from the Russian side, but the talks have begun in just the last 45 minutes. There's also been, for the first night in about 3 nights, a small pause in the city of Kyiv. Not as heavy a bombardment, but satellite imagery showing Russian troops continuing to move on that city. All the while, the humanitarian crisis here grows worse. Mark, step with me. I just want to introduce you guys very quickly to Sophia. We were here this morning getting ready for our live shot, and Sophia walked through the square with her friends. I wanted to ask you just if you could help explain to people at home what it has been like for you to live through this.
It feels like the end of the world. The house is destroying. The children are dying, and we just want a peaceful life. We didn't do anything wrong. We're just trying to stay calm. We're just trying to help our people, our military. We do anything that we can, but it's really hard. It's really scary. But we try to stay united. The all Ukraine now is united, and it's the greatest I've ever seen in my life.
Sophia, thank you so much. These 4 individuals here, all around the ages of 18, for the first time the other day, made Molotov cocktails. They said it was easy to make, but none of them expected to make it. That is what we are seeing here on the ground. Civilians trying to step up, help the folks who are fleeing, but also to actually get to the front and fight the oncoming Russian forces.
Cal, they are so representative of what we are seeing all across the country there. You mentioned those satellite images. There was images taken yesterday by U.S.-based Maxar Technologies. It does show a large deployment of Russian ground forces moving toward the capital, Kyiv. So give us a summary. How intense is the fighting right now across the country? Are there worries that it's going to intensify now in the coming days?
Look, there's always that worry because we never really expected, or people here didn't expect, certainly the fighting to be this widespread. They didn't expect it to happen in Kyiv. They thought it would happen if it happened at all in the east. That hasn't been the case. Now, as I said, today was really the first night overnight where there wasn't a heavy bombardment in the capital, but there's a concern that those troops are still moving. The heaviest fighting seems to be, at least today, in the northeastern part of the country, in that city of Kharkiv, where we've seen Russian troops moving into those urban areas. But I think the concern here is, though, even though we're seeing a slight pause in the fighting, that there is a military regrouping on the part of the Russians. And if you talk to people here who are very suspicious of those peace talks, they'll tell you that if the Russians go for a ceasefire, it's just so that they can regroup. There is no trust here for obvious reasons. conflict.
And this morning, Ukraine's President Zelensky released a video statement saying prisoners with military experience will be released to help fight Russian forces. He's also calling on the European Union to immediately admit his country into the bloc. Over the weekend, we saw major sanctions levied on Russia after he pushed the West to do more. And he so famously recently said, I don't need ammunition. I need ammunition. I don't need a ride. What do Ukrainians make of their president right now and how he has been handling this conflict?
There's an English cricket saying, cometh the hour, cometh the man, and that has kind of made the rounds here. People love President Zelensky. They see him as the leader of the resistance. He's been putting out these daily morning videos that are not just to rally people behind him, but they're really proof of life videos. He says he's the #1 target of the Russians. That is undoubtedly true, but he has struck a chord here that I think is becoming sort of the narrative of this war, which is that Ukrainians know what they're fighting for, that Ukrainians are fighting for their homeland, that they are fighting for democracy, that they are fighting for freedom. One of the people we interviewed this morning, her house was destroyed. That is what they're fighting for. They're fighting for their homes. It is entirely unclear what the Russian army is fighting for, and the Ukrainian government, specifically President Zelensky, they're trying to get that story out there to the world.
That was symbolic in the women you just interviewed a moment ago. Cal, thanks so much for joining us this morning. Appreciate it.
Let's now cross over to the eastern Ukrainian city of Kharkiv, which faced another night of shelling by Russian forces. Jack Crosby is a Rolling Stone correspondent and an NBC News contributor, and he joins us now. Jack, good morning. So this is a city many people may have seen video on social media under attack this weekend. Pretty dramatic images. We know you right now are currently, I understand, making a quick getaway. Our viewers might see you're in a car right now because of this shelling. Tell us what you're going through. Tell us what you've just escaped, where you are, if you're safe, and also just what the situation and mood is like in this particular city this morning.
Yeah, so it's been an interesting situation in Kharkiv for the past couple of days. There was very heavy shelling 2 days ago. On the night before, there was a Russian incursion into the middle of the city. That was sort of the first major military operation that had penetrated that far into the city center of Kharkiv. Yesterday, there was a slight lull. And last night was relatively quiet in many areas of the city, although there was still shelling and bombardment on the outskirts. This morning, however, that escalation I think that we had been looking for and fearing for a long time has certainly happened. We were under pretty heavy shell fire even in the center of the city this morning, and made the decision to leave the city. I'm now in a vehicle at a checkpoint outside of the sort of southeastern city of Dnipro. So waiting to get into that city, out of danger from Kharkiv at the moment, but in another city that is very much going to be in a line with the Russian advance, potentially in a couple of days' time.
And Jack, right now, when you're sort of fleeing something like that, what's happening in Kharkiv on your way to another city, how is it just on roads in between? I mean, are you seeing anything, any type of military action in between those places? Do you feel safe out on the road?
So there's a lot of activity where we are now. I would say in the past 10 miles or so since we've gone through a couple of outlying towns of Dnipro, things have been relatively normal. We were able to stop at a gas station and refuel and grab coffee and some snacks and things. On the roads immediately outside of Kharkiv, the mood was extremely tense. It doesn't appear as though Russian forces have entirely surrounded the city yet, but we saw many military assets sort of preparing for that eventuality. Civilian workers and civilian defense forces digging trenches outside of the city, tanks moving around, people getting into position. There's a heavy sort of presence both of the military and of these new civilian defense units sort of riding around in their standard civilian cars, but carrying weapons and patrolling the roads outside of the city. And then otherwise, you know, much of the roads through eastern Ukraine are pretty desolate right now. There's very few cars moving around. There's occasional checkpoints manned by either the military or these civilian defense forces. So, you know, where we are, there's definitely more of a sense of normalcy, although we are in a long line for a military checkpoint to get into Dnipro at the moment. But just, you know, a few 100 miles or so away, it's very much sort of a wartime atmosphere.
And Jack, it seems like obviously things have taken somewhat of a turn overnight as you've left the city. But just yesterday, the Kharkiv's governor said the city was under complete control by Ukraine, even claiming that some Russian troops have been surrendering. That's specifically what I want to ask about. Is that something that you saw yourself at all or heard about?
We had heard and seen those reports as well, and certainly seen the reports from the civilian administration in Kharkiv. It does appear as though that Russian incursion 2 days ago was pushed back pretty successfully. But it was a very sort of small, limited incursion. There's been a lot of reporting that was sort of confused as to the tactics that were employed and why the Russians would send such a small kind of incursion into the city center that was dealt with by the Ukrainian military and civilian defense. And so, you know, we all thought this could be a prelude to a much more major escalation, which it appears from what we're seeing so far has begun.
And Jack, quickly, before I let you go, just explain the importance of Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city, to Russia, such an important target. How far do people think Moscow is willing to go to capture it?
You know, I think right now it's sort of anyone's guess. Traditional wisdom at the beginning, Kharkiv is a massive university town, you know, but in pre-war times had a large amount of cultural and just social overlap with Russia. There are many people there who have friends and family in Kharkiv because of its proximity to the Russian border and because of its sort of just cultural closeness to Russia. And it was one of the first cities that during this Russian military buildup, we were worried that would be targeted. And until today, it did seem as though the Russian military's focus was on Kyiv, which I think it still is. But Kharkiv is very much in the crosshairs now.
Jack Crosby, thank you so much. Stay safe, and we will be checking back in with you.